I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award-winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Today on Just Justice, we will talk with Bobby Bostic, someone who got a second chance and took it. In 1996, Bobby was sentenced at the age of 16 to 241 years in prison for an armed robbery in Missouri where no one was seriously injured. He went to trial and was convicted. The sentencing judge said to Bobby, "You made your choice. You will live with your choice. You will die with your choice. Because Bobby Bostic, you will die in the Department of Corrections. Do you hear that? Your mandatory date to go in front of the parole board is 2201. Nobody in this courtroom will be alive in 2201. Welcome to Just Justice, Bobby. Fortunately, you did not die in prison. You are out now. And it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm wondering if we could just start by taking a few minutes and going through what happened to you. I mean, 241 years as a sentence, my goodness. That was the longest sentence in Missouri ever given to a juvenile for a crime that didn't involve a murder. Can you walk us through sort of what happened? You were 16 years old when this crime took place. Do you remember what was happening for you in your life at that time?
Just hearing those words, it brings it back to memory. Those are some real harsh words. But at that time in my life, when I committed the crimes, I was just an adolescent out in the streets, misguided, committing petty crimes like selling drugs and things like that. Robbery wasn't really a thing that I was always into. It just that day it was an unplanned robbery that happened, and unfortunately, it landed me with the 241-year sentence. Unplanned crimes, and it's things like that, spontaneous things that turn out with harsh consequences, and that's what really happened. When I went to prison, got that sentence, I somehow was lost, but had to find myself, and that took a inner struggle of learning myself and growing, and eventually I turned around and changed my life and rehabilitated myself and was released from prison ultimately.
You've done some amazing things since you've been out and while you were in prison. And we're going to get there because I really want to talk to you about that. But I just want to go back, if we can, to the start of all of this, because I have to tell you, I read about your case a while ago, a long time ago, as you know. And I was so struck by this sentence. And, you said it was an unplanned crime. So it was just sort of a crime of spontaneity, which doesn't make it a good thing, but certainly doesn't make it sort of the worst of the worst. And yet there you were, 16 years old. You're treated as an adult in adult court. Were you ever offered a plea bargain?
Yeah, I was offered a plea bargain of a life sentence in Missouri. That's equal 30 years. So I was offered, yeah, that life 30-year sentence. And in my mind, it's 16, 17, 30 years was forever. So I wasn't going to take it. I went to jury trial not because I was innocent, but because I was trying to take my chances with the jury, assuming that they would give me less time than the judge. And they recommended 30 on the robberies, 15 on the other charges, and 5 and 10 on other charges. But the judge ran it consecutive, which equaled to 241 years. Which in Missouri, you got to serve 85% of your sentence. That's why she was saying I don't go for parole until 2201, which would have been 204 years away from the day I was sentenced.
What do you think it was about the crime or about you as a 16-year-old teenager that led the prosecutor to offer you such a harsh plea offer in the first place, and then led the judge to impose such an incredibly long sentence? Nobody was seriously injured. Why even would the prosecution say you have to serve 30 years?
The only thing I can contribute that to is at the time, a lot of crime was happening. It was election year. A lot of juveniles was committing crime rates were up, and Clinton had just passed the truth in sentencing law. All that stuff was going on, and I assumed that it was a tribute to all that.
Right. So there was a whole political context, and you, this little 16-year-old teenager, got swept up in that. I mean, that must have been devastating. And you had a co-defendant, right? And your co-defendant was an adult, was over the age of 18. What happened to your co-defendant?
About 4 months after I got found guilty, he pleaded guilty and took the 30-year sentence. He unfortunately he was like within 2 years of his release date, and he died in prison. They said it was synthetic marijuana overdose. That's what they attributed his death to.
Oh my goodness. Were you in touch with him while you were incarcerated?
Yeah, we was at the same prison several years, and they transferred you a lot in level 5. So we was at the same prison a couple years before he died. It was a struggle with the guards when he died because he was under the influence of marijuana or whatever, and they restrained him, and he never got up from the restraint. So, but on the autopsy, it just say he died of synthetic marijuana overdose. So that's what the autopsy say. When you're under the influence of marijuana in prison, you can act irrational, and restraint tactics is what they use. And sometimes the restraint tactic can be a little severe. And unfortunately, in his case, he didn't wake up.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. And I'm sorry, this whole conversation is just, it's a hard one, at least when we look backwards. Staying for one more minute with what was happening in that courtroom. So you went to trial, you knew you were guilty, but 30 years seemed like a long time. And it seems it is, in fact, a long time. But then you were convicted, and hearing the judge give you that kind of sentence and make that kind of statement, how did you feel hearing those comments and then hearing that you were being sentenced to 241 years in prison?
I felt numb. I felt hopeless, but I don't know. Even in that moment, I attribute to God and the divine gave me a little notion or a little nugget that said right then and there, she told me that you're not going to die in prison. But that still didn't absolve or take away the fact of what I was just told that I would die in prison. So, as I explained in my autobiography at that moment, my autobiography is on Amazon. It's called Humble to the Dust Still I Rise. And at the beginning of the book, on like the third page, I was explaining that at that moment I was numb. I felt, but I didn't feel. And it's like, did she just say that? And it's like, I done had guns pointed at me, been shot at and all that on the street, but none of that was worse than being told that you would die in prison. And it's like, especially for the crime itself, nobody died, nobody was seriously injured. It's like, this is my life being taken, for this. I'm like, okay, so I just got to go in here and fight. I was numb, heartbroken, shell shocked, but even in my brokenness, it was a glimmer of hope. There was some semblance of strength, and I had to forge ahead, and that's what I did. Easier said than done. It wasn't an easy battle. I'm saying it like it wasn't nothing. Don't look at me today and think that it was just easy. When you 18, you told you would die in prison. You never just walk out of there and you cried. You're a human being, so you cried all the things, but somehow you just got to muster the strength to move on, and that's what I did.
I mean, it is remarkable. You were facing this incredibly long term, and you could have just given up. You could have just curled up in a ball and given up, but you didn't. You didn't let prison defeat you. And so I'm wondering, how did you make the most of your time while you were in prison?
I made the most of my time by reading, studying, writing, and just faith and just never giving up. It's hard to explain how a man can find hope in a dark, negative environment such as prison, but every day I found inspiration. Every day I found hope, and I lived on that, and that's what got me through.
When you say you found hope every day, what sort of inspired you?
I found hope in reading. It was books. Like for somebody on the outside looking in, it's hard to understand how a man can go back and read about the Revolutionary War or read about Africa 10,000 years ago and great African kingdoms and get hope. But seeing people overcome whatever struggle they had to overcome, that's what gave me hope. Reading about how America went against the British Army, the strongest army in the world, and won. What faith they had to have to sign that Constitution when they was putting their signature, when they was signing, they death weren't really if they wouldn't have succeeded. So when I read that type of stuff, it's like reading about Henry Ford and all these guys from hundreds of years ago. It's just like, this is my hope. This is my inspiration. Thomas Edison trying 10,000 times with the light bulb. if these guys can do that with no resources, no internet, what can I not possibly do to get myself out of prison? There is hope. And I just fed on that daily. I stayed inspired, scriptures, Joseph, Moses, reading this stuff not as a story, but as true life, real life stuff that God created. And it's like, okay, with this, man, what can you not get through? And I stayed high on the intellect, intellectual high, intellectual ecstasy, and that's what kept me going, motivated in spite of my circumstance.
That's amazing. And so not only did you discover history and reading, but you were 16 when you went in. So had you graduated high school on the outside?
Uh, I went to ninth grade for about 2 weeks and then I went back to school. So I went in there and got a GED, tried for college courses, couldn't afford it, and it took me thousands and thousands of letters to find. I was trying to get scholarships, churches, anybody to pay for my college, and over thousands. I can't count how many thousands, but I know it was thousands of letters. I finally found a lady in Kansas City who was in the newspaper who paid for $18,000 worth of my college before she passed. And then another guy on the East Coast paid several more thousand before I got out to attain my associates and then 7 classes away from my bachelor's degree when I was released. So a lot of people helped me along the way.
I don't think I knew that. I knew you got your GED in prison, but you couldn't afford, you were eligible to go to college if you could afford to pay for the credits. You were so persistent. It was so important to you that you wrote thousands of letters and someone actually agreed to help fund your college education. That's extraordinary. And so you're still 7 credits short or 7 classes short of getting your bachelor's.
7 classes, like 30 credits short.
What's your major?
Sociology.
That's great. And while you were in prison too, not only did you get your GED, but you also completed every program that was offered to you.
Yeah, some of the program was only for inmates that had a year left. I took them programs when I had possibly no chance of getting out, right? And just being in the class with 8 guys that's all going home. I'm the only one with 241 years and no chance of getting out. But that inspired me to be around those guys knowing that they was going home, to know I had to take advantage of my opportunity and do something with it one day when I did get it. But it kept me dreaming. Nobody can understand. In a sense, it can be torture. You sitting in the class with everybody making real life plans of how they're gonna open bank accounts, and I'm taking these classes like, man, and that was 17 years before I got out. I was taking these type of classes. What possibly can I do to get out? Like to apply this stuff. Let me get back to the library. Let me fight to get out because I have no chance of getting out as things stand. But I never, ever, ever, ever gave up hope though.
It's just one of those things, being so oriented towards hope in a hopeless place is so powerful. And you used your time, as you're describing so well. You got your GED and you took all these college classes that you were able to persuade someone to help you finance. And you also wrote multiple books, which I want to talk to you about in a little bit. One other thing that you did while you were in prison, even though, again, there was no hope at that time of you getting out, is you reached out to the people who were involved, who were victims in your crime, right?
Yeah. And that was part of taking classes too, learning about victim impact, what victims go through. Of course, I realized the error of my crime and what I did, the harm I caused. So I just reached out to those people in my 10th or 15th, between my 10th and 15th year to say I was sorry.
Did you ever hear back from them, or was it just the act of apologizing that was so powerful for you?
It was the act of apologizing and the hope that they did get my letter.
And so there you are, you're serving all of this time, this unbelievable amount of time, and trying to figure out a way out. And there really didn't seem to be a way out. And then even Judge Evelyn Baker, the judge who made that horrible statement at sentencing, she changed her mind about your punishment. She started working to help you get out also, right? How did that happen? That's amazing.
But it happened 20 some years after I was locked up that my case had hit the media real tough. It was just out there that I had that time and who responsible. And she came back and said she made a mistake and that I deserve a second chance. She said she had read articles in newspapers and saw who I had became, and she was thinking to herself, like, that's not the same child I sentenced. So when she saw who I became and who I grew into and evolved to, that's what made her come back and say I made a mistake. That this is not the guy I sentenced. and she went on a 4 years advocacy mission, and finally I was released.
So she really played not only a big role in sentencing you, but a big role in helping you get out of your sentence, which is kind of, just an amazing turnaround for her. Do you know whether she sentenced anyone else to those kinds of sentences? Did she have regret about any other sentences that she imposed?
Well, on record, they asked her, she said out of 25,000, this was a NPR interview, I think, in like 18, National Public Radio interview in 2018. I think it was in that interview where she said if it wasn't an interview, it was around that time, another interview, she said out of 250, out of 25,000 cases of people she sentenced, that's the only one she had regret about.
Wow. Okay. And so there you are. You've got the sentencing judge working to release you. You've done everything you could think of, not only to better yourself, but to take advantage of this time in prison. And then the Supreme Court ruled in 2010 in a case called Graham versus Florida that it was unconstitutional to sentence someone who was a juvenile to life in a case that did not involve a homicide. You must have felt so hopeful, right?
Yeah, there was the hope. From the day that they accepted search warrant, I watched the case. It took a year later. They accepted search warrant like May the 4th in 2009. It took to 2010 for the answer, and that was my hope. I knew that that was it, and I figured they was gonna rule in Graham favor. And when they did, I knew that was it. There wasn't no way around it, and nothing. I thought in my mind. So St. Louis University Law School took my case pro bono and filed, and to the Missouri Supreme Court, and they denied it, saying that Graham didn't apply to me. So
I love that you were following along with the Graham versus Florida decision as it's made its way through the Supreme Court. And I also love that you thought for sure they would rule in favor of Graham. I mean, they did, but I don't know that it was. I was nervous about whether they were going to do what I think is the right thing, but they did. And then I'm sorry, who did you say took your case?
St. Louis University Law School.
So you have representation, everyone's super excited for you, and then it's kind of like you hit another roadblock because Graham versus Florida in its language applied to juveniles who were sentenced to life. And you weren't sentenced to life, you were sentenced to 241 years. I mean, it's a difference without much of a distinction, but it is technically a different kind of sentence. So what happened? The lawyers at the St. Louis Law School, took up your case. They challenged this idea that 241 years should be covered under Graham. And then what happened?
Nothing happened. They denied it. Attorney General said it didn't apply. The court agreed. Then I kept following each state, and every state was ruling that juveniles had over like 70, 80 years, Graham did apply. So the states around the Missouri, Iowa, all these other states were saying that these sentences does equal life without, and they got to be resentenced. California. So that gave me hope. Even though Missouri was being harsh, I knew that somehow these cases would make their way up to either the Eighth Circuit or the Ninth Circuit. They ruled. Seventh Circuit ruled. All these circuits was ruling that Graham did apply. So I was figuring that eventually, maybe to make it to U.S. Supreme Court or the Eighth Circuit, and they'll tell them they had to be resentenced. But then Miller came out in 2012 saying that you could have life without, if you had automatic life without, you can have, you had to be resentenced. So that gave me hope. And then it took 4 years for Missouri to make that retroactive. And then when that was retroactive, where guys in Missouri, juveniles who had first degree murder, was able to go for parole, and I was still stuck. So it's like, some people was like, if he had a murder, he'd be going for parole. But I never thought of it like that. I just always, it was torture, but I had hope. I was like, man, I'm gonna get out of here somehow. I just got to keep fighting, and that's what I did. People don't know that part of the struggle that you would know. That Graham versus Florida in 2010, Miller versus Alabama in 2012, Montgomery versus Louisiana in 16. People won't know about the backdrop of all that. They just know the end outcome. They don't know that from 2010 to 2022 when I got out, it was a whole array of cases across the United States that I'd have been had got out, but not in Missouri. So I was in one of those harsh states, and I just kept staying hopeful and fight.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that because I think many of our listeners wouldn't understand. So Graham versus Florida said if a person was a kid and was sentenced to life and it didn't involve a homicide, that was unconstitutional. And then, as you mentioned, in Miller versus Alabama, the Supreme Court said, and any kid who was sentenced to life without parole for a homicide under a statute that made it mandatory, that's also unconstitutional. And then a few years later, the Supreme Court said, and by the way, that applies to everyone retroactively. And so, to your point, Bobby, had you been convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole, you would have been at least given an opportunity to go before the parole board. But you didn't fall into any of those categories because you had a number of years as your sentence. So it's just kind of wild. And Missouri is a harsh state. People don't appreciate that Missouri is one of the more severe sentencing states in the country. But what happened with you was somewhat extraordinary. So there you have Judge Evelyn Baker advocating for you. Your case starts to generate a lot of press, in part because it did seem so unfair that you were sitting in prison for 241 years. And because of the way the courts were ruling in Missouri about what that meant, you couldn't get access to a second chance. But then Missouri changed a law, right? It took a change in Missouri state law for you to get the opportunity to be released. How did that new law even get passed?
New law got passed because a Republican senator sitting in his office. He seen the national news of Evelyn Baker on TV, one of those national shows she was on. He seen it and he came and saw me and decided he was going to help me get out of prison. He worked the scenes for a couple of years behind the scenes, and he got all his Republican colleagues, and they passed what is called the Bobby Bostic law, and that's how I was released from prison. Ultimately, the law allowed Bobby Bostic law allowed anybody who was under 18 who to go for parole after they served 15 years. And I had went up after 26 years. They gave me a year out date. I got released in November 22.
You must have felt, I mean, again, not that you were happy that it took as long as it did. I don't want to minimize how many years you spent behind bars while this was all getting worked out, but it must feel really good to know that there is a law named after you that helped so many other people who were young, who were children at the time they were sentenced to terms that were longer than 15 years, that you were helped provide a second chance or an opportunity for a second chance for all of those people.
Yeah, when you're in a humble place like that, you don't take credit for something like that because you know it's beyond anything you could have did or even went through. You attribute it to divine power because you know you have no power. You know you have no pull, no ties, or no resources. So I attribute it to the higher power. I don't really take credit for that. I just know that it was meant for us to get those second chances, and I just attribute it to a higher power. It's hard to take credit for something like that, especially in a state like this, to know that a miracle happened like that. It's hard to think about it and take credit for it. It's a humbling thing. And that's what I tell college students when I'm speaking across the country. You never know the change that you can make. You're not powerless, so keep trying. And living testament is that law that had passed, and over 200 juveniles got out days behind the law, so forth. So that's the power of perseverance and never giving up, and believing that you have a voice, believing that you got something to give to the world and do out in the world. So we can make change in the world. And that's what I tell students, church congregations, union halls, wherever I'm speaking in the world. I'm not just speaking, I'm living testament that things are possible and we can really change policy, change laws. We can make a real impact in this world. And it's going to be not just the power of one, it's going to be the power of many. So that situation inspired a lot of people to make those changes. I just happen to be a catalyst of other change. And that's how change always starts. It's a personal cause or event that sparks a catalyst for change. But we primarily can't always take credit or responsibility. We just got to know that we was used as a tool for a miracle to happen. And we all can do it on any level, education, college, within our dorms, policy on local levels, even in a school institution, electric bills, electric companies, healthcare companies. There's so much we can do. We just use the power of persistence, perseverance, motivation to get through these things and to spark change.
Yeah. I hear you. I mean, and you were the spark for the change, and it's an incredibly exciting and impressive thing that you helped draw attention to something and really make a difference. So you've been out since December 2022, and you've been doing a lot of amazing things. You're a published author. Some of the books that you've written, you wrote while you were in prison. Some you've written while you were out. And your most recent book that you mentioned, Humbled to the Dust, Still I Rise, is autobiographical. Can you tell us more about the books that you write, about the subjects that you like to take on?
All my books are available on Amazon. The topics I write about is my real life experiences, not things that I saw third party and none of that. It's my own life experience. This the only thing that I felt qualified to write about because I knew these things in my soul because I lived them. So I wrote about my true life experiences. I wrote a book about teenagers, why kids the way that they is, because I got locked up at 16 and I went inside my own mind and wrote to the world like this is what goes on inside the younger generation mind. So if y'all want to know what's going on, read my book, A Generation Misunderstood. Single mothers. I watched my mother firsthand struggle all her life as a single mother. That book was about single mothers. They struggle and to tell kids to please listen to your mother, who was your first teacher. The two books about prison, of course, I lived in there 27 years, so I was qualified to write about that. For people that never been there, want to know what goes on inside prison. My life story, it took me 7 days to write that book because I lived that book. No research and nothing. I had to research my own life. I just went inside myself and wrote. The other poetry books is just so powerful inspiration. When I read back on it now, I'm like, man, you wrote these books when you had no chance of getting out. And these poems are so powerful inspiration. People would think I wrote it after I got out, but now I wrote them in my darkest days, not to only inspire myself, but to dig within. And I wrote for prosperity. I wanted people 200 years from now, they go and do something to pick up one of those poetry books and just see the gift that God gave me in writing, but at the other same time to pick up themselves from the hole that they dug themselves into and climb out of it and inspire something great. So when you read those poetry books, that's what you get from them. And that's my gift, writing. I tapped into my gift. I discovered my gift. And that's part of my speech themes when I go out in public, do motivational speaking. Please find your gift. Because once you find your gift, it's a gift to the world. And then you find your calling. And when you find your calling, you can touch many lives and make a great impact on others. So I inspire people to do the same thing I did along my journey, to dig deep within, find their greatness, find their hope, their inspiration, take that and inspire the world, not only to do something, but to act on what they're giving them. And for them to act on what I'm giving them in my speech is more than a speech. It's a call to action. It's a digging from within to find the diamond within you for the world to shine and for the world to see that your own greatness and to see what you can do and not make it about you, but make it about paying it forward and helping the world, changing the conditions within yourself, within your family, within your community, within your city, state, and then the world. It's powerful. It's possible for all of us. And that's the message that I give when I'm doing public speaking.
You've been out now almost 2 years.
Been out like 17, 18 months. And right now I'm self-employed. I do motivational speaking. I get paid speaking engagements and I sell my ebooks. And that was my plan when I got out anyway, to be independent, have my own publishing company, which I got called Mind Diamonds LLC. And I just do public speaking. I also go into the juvenile detention centers 3 times a week. I volunteer to teach them a writing workshop because that's what I know. I teach them how to write job resumes, how to write business plans, because a lot of them end up for committing economic crime. So I'm trying to teach them how to write a business plan to come up with a positive way to make money. I'm teaching them how to write poems and essays to release their writings or their pain through poetry and prose and study violence. I'm teaching them how to write job resumes and essays to get a job. Also, I got a nonprofit official 501c3 called Dear Mama, where we go and do giveaways twice a month throughout impoverished communities in the St. Louis region. Free toys, clothes, shoes, books, toys, and things like that, where people can have those things that don't have them. And people in poverty in my city is really in need, and I recognize that need, and I try to help any on a grassroots level the way I can without being tied into a big organization. And I'm just doing it from the ground up.
I mean, you're really making a difference in your community. but you're out on parole, right? So how has it been reintegrating into society, right? So you're doing these amazing things. You're volunteering at the juvenile detention center, and you've started your own nonprofit, Dear Mama, and you are continuing to sort of speak and write about your experiences. But how has it been to be out after all that time in?
It's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. You're free. When you've been deprived of something like that, a gift that other people take for granted, then you soak up every day. Even like I go through financial hardship sometimes, but there's nothing compared to what I was going through in there. So I'm free. I figure out somehow the bills gonna get paid, which they always do, and I'm all right. I'm free. Life is to be lived, it's to be experienced to the fullest, it's to be enjoyed. You look back 100 years now, where they didn't have indoor heating, indoor plumbing. Look at all the commodities we got at the touch of our hands: cell phone, TVs, radios, airplanes. All these blessings we got to count and just be grateful instead of being complaining about something that if we just simply study history and see how they lived back then and see how far the human race has advanced, we can appreciate all these small blessings and be like, man, life is good.
That's a beautiful sentiment. We should all live by that, right? Because it's true. It's a beautiful gift to be alive and to be free. Now, are you still in touch with Judge Baker?
Yeah, I go see her like once a month. If I'm riding in her area, I just call and be like, hey, I'm gonna come around her. And she'd be like, the door unlocked, and I just go in, we sit down and talk, and I leave.
That's nice. You know, this podcast, Just Justice, is really looking at the idea of second chances. You know, I have a question for you. Do you think that you are sort of an exception to the rule, or do you think that people who are incarcerated for long periods of time, lifetimes, do you think that everyone deserves a second chance?
Yeah, that's just me though. Some people actually are not going to get out, unfortunately, because the heinous nature of their crimes, no matter how much they done changed, some crimes are so heinous that some people will remain in there, no matter how much people want to give people second chances. It's what they did that's going to keep them there. But even those people have something to offer to society. I believe in second chances because I lived around those people that I know have changed, and if they could get a second chance, would contribute to society. But if you're looking at what they did, it'd be hard for most people to even think about letting them out because of the nature of whether it was 20, 15 years ago. That's just the way society is set up. So some people are not going to get out, and some people know that. Some people give up hope because of that, and some people, despite them not getting out, they realize the wrong they done, and they just want to live life even in that to the best of their ability. So people deserve second chances. I'm not the exception to the rule, but I am like a lottery winner in that sense because people never know if you're not in there. But you can study thousands of cases, thousands, tens of thousands of cases. It's like winning that lottery. That's how many lifers ever get out, especially those that's guilty. They never get out because the way the system's set up, the appeal system set up, it's over with. You used to have them 3 or 4 cracks, and that's so hard. The standards, the anti-terrorism bill, the certain hurdles you got to overcome, then proven prejudice just to get a legal claim in court when you're guilty is almost impossible. I don't believe in the word impossible, but the way it's set up, it makes people feel like it's impossible and they give up. So it's like actually winning the lottery that a lifer that's guilty get out of prison, especially in conservative states, any state though, but especially conservative states. And it don't have to, it can be any state because the way the anti-terrorism death penalty bill is set up, as far as appeals being over with real quick, it's almost hard impossible to get out of prison. That makes me like a lottery in that sense, but it was a Powerball lottery in that sense because it helped a lot of other people win a small lottery and get out too that wasn't getting out. So you never know how things gonna happen, but it's hard to get out of prison.
I love that. That's right. You won the lottery, but because of the way you won the lottery with the Bobby Bostic bill in Missouri, you allowed for some other folks who might have been stuck behind bars for a really, really long time or forever to have a chance to get out. Thank you so much, Bobby Bostic, for taking the time to talk with us on Just Justice. Bobby's books are available on Amazon. He's available to be a speaker for your organization if you're interested. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thank y'all too. And if anybody want to know the story, anything you didn't hear here, simply Google Bobby Bostic and look up my name. Follow me on Instagram. Twitter, and all other platforms, and you can see the story and you can reach out. Thank you, Jessica, for having me. For those who don't know, Jessica is one of the first people that wrote about my case back before it was very highly publicized, and I appreciate you writing that story back then and showing the interest in this case. And we still here talking about it years later because we're on the other side of the miracle now. When you wrote about it back then, there was no chance of me getting out. Now we're on the other side of the miracle that I'm free. And we never, in our wildest dreams, ever thought that it happened like a law getting passed, but it did happen. And that's the power of advocacy and fighting. So those who want a second chance, if you're listening and you fight for a second chance for your loved one or somebody you know in prison, as you should hear the details of my story, be inspired because it was impossible, but the impossible was done. So keep fighting for your loved one in prison, and you never know how it's going to turn out. And if you want to hear me talk like this in person, I'm available for speaking. And Jessica, thank you for having the show, even about justice and second chances, because that's an area that you've been interested in and you've been writing about for a long time. And to see me and just a few, hundreds of people that you even mentioned ain't getting out or didn't get out. But for the few that did get out, and for me in particular, to be all the way from Missouri, a whole different state, whole different region, for you to have wrote about me and now I'm out free. That's a beautiful journey, and that ties the justice journey together. And here it is, we seeing the fruit of fighting for justice. A man that's free after being served sentenced to 241 years.
Thanks again, Bobby. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Just Justice. If you like what you heard, please follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and tell a friend. To share an idea for the show or to stay in touch, head to jessicahenryjustice.com or find me on the socials at Jessica Henry Justice. See you next time.